We went on a camping trip in Appalachia. Never again. Frankly, I'm on the fence when it comes to the supernatural. I'm not completely sold, but I'm not going to rule it out completely. However, recently, I've decided to reconsider that belief. This story happened a month or so ago in July. Me and my friends had planned out this exciting camping trip to Appalachia. We had an Airbnb and everything prepared. Okay, don't judge me. I didn't want to sleep in a tent. Anyways, it would be a nice change of pace from Iowa. I'd take trees over cornfields any days. The only caveat was the 12-hour drive. Now, before I continue the story, I'll introduce my friends so none of you all are confused. I've got 3 other friends. There's Emma, Matt, and Parker. We had brought along Emma's little brother, who I'll call C since he's a minor. Emma's parents were arrested for things that aren't really important for this story, but now C's under Emma's legal guardianship, and she couldn't find a babysitter for him. None of us really cared, in fact. We thought C was cool. Anyways, we arrived at the Airbnb and unpacked. There were 3 rooms, so I got a room alone, Matt and Parker got a room together, and Emma and C got a room together. I got lucky. Now, it was around 6 p.m.-ish. Probably, so we decided to set up a campfire and start roasting marshmallows. We ended up forgetting the marshmallows. No matter, me and Matt decided to go drive to the nearest town and pick up some from the store. C wasn't happy, but we assured him that we'll be back in 10 minutes. While driving to the store, me and Matt talked about Appalachia. Maybe we'll see a skinwalker, said Matt. Dude, shut up. Aren't those things located in Navajo territories? There is no way we'd encounter one here in Appalachia, I said, and I knew I was right. We arrived at the local convenience store and argued over what kind of marshmallows we should get. I suggested regular marshmallows. Matt suggested pink marshmallows. We eventually came to a decision, and I bought a Hershey's bar as well, since I figured we'd need extra, considering how much of a fat ass Parker is when it comes to candy. After paying, we drove back to the Airbnb. C told me that he saw a deer and was very proud of getting close to it. Emma affirmed this. Apparently, this deer's eyes were on the front of its head, but it didn't appear hostile, so she let C get close enough to it to not disturb it in any way. In addition to roasting marshmallows, we'd be making burgers and hot dogs. We lit the fireplace and began cooking the meats. That is when a hiker walked up to our campfire. He had a duffel bag, introduced himself as Josh. He asks if he could use our campfire. We were weirded out, but agreed. Josh opened his duffel bag, revealing a bunch of different kinds of meat. There was chicken, beef, venison, and what looked like pork. Emma questioned this, and Josh states that he thinks it's pork. He found it in a cooler tucked underneath a blind. According to Josh, there was no one around, so he took it. Emma immediately states that she wants the pork. She absolutely loves bacon. Josh shrugs and agrees, but does warn Emma that he didn't know how long the pork was left out there. Emma ignored his warning and insisted on having it. Parker spoke with Josh while me, Emma, and Matt were trying not to horribly burn the meats. Once finished, I had some burgers. Matt and Parker ate some hot dogs and some of Josh's game, while Emma ate the pork. Emma started to feel sick. Damn. So the pork was left out for a while. Josh just threw out the rest of the pork, and Emma went to go puke. We finished eating dinner and began roasting marshmallows. We had way too many marshmallows, so we couldn't actually finish them all. But as expected, Parker's fat ass finished the Hershey's bar. I went in to check on Emma. She had finished puking, and she looked a little pale, not a sickly pale, just drained. I told her to take some Pepto and get some sleep. I didn't want to hold to make her feel bad or think that she somehow ruined this trip. I went back outside to wave a goodbye Josh, who warned about black bears. Then me, Parker, Matt, and C hung out for an hour, before it started to sprinkle, and then rain. We went inside and decided to just go to sleep. Emma didn't want to sleep in the same room as C since she was sick with God knows what, and didn't want it to spread to C. Matt figured it was just food poisoning, but still had C crash in my room instead. I didn't protest, but I made it clear that I wasn't happy. So much for sleeping alone. Anyways, we got ready for bed and fell asleep. Well, C did. I did not. It heard loud rustling outside, didn't think too much about it. But what was strange was quiet everything was. It got up and opened up my window a crack to let air in, and didn't hear anything. No cicadas, no insects, nothing. just the wind howling through the trees and the rain. I shut the window and went back to bed. I laid in bed for a few minutes before I heard something get thrown at the window. I turned my head to look at the window. Nothing but darkness. Something about it didn't sit right with me. I got up and walked to the living room. I had to make sure if I locked all the doors. The floor creaked under every step I made. Checked the front door, locked. I checked the back door, locked as well. But then I heard Emma's voice. She was on the other end of the glass door. "Let me in," said Emma. I looked through the glass door and didn't see anyone. But then again, I couldn't see anything much at all. "Emma? What are you doing out there?" I asked. It took her a second to respond, but she eventually did. A simple, "It's cold." This struck me as odd, so I went to Emma's room and found her, sleeping on her bed, facing away from the door. I froze. If Emma was here, then who was outside? I slowly closed the door, but stopped. I noticed she was in the fetal position while sleeping and mumbling. The fetal position wasn't the strange part. She did puke a few hours earlier, but the mumbling. Emma doesn't talk in her sleep. I know that for a fact. And what she was mumbling was weird. She was mumbling in no language I recognized. I grabbed the desk lamp, just in case. I pushed the door open and walked in. I held the lamp-like weapon. I looked as she turned over to face me, and then she opened her eyes. We both screamed, and I dropped the lamp. To her, it looked like I was going to hit her over the head, and her scream had startled me. Parker and Matt walked into the room. They looked annoyed. "The hell happened?" asked Matt. I explained that I heard Emma's voice outside. I looked at Emma. She looked fine. Too fine. She didn't look like she threw up only hours prior. I looked at her pillow. A little bit of her hair was on the pillow, like it fell out. We walked out to the living room, and Parker opened the back door and stepped outside, only to soaked by the rain. However, a cold, eerily cold breeze crept into the Airbnb. It stepped out with Parker and turned on my phone to use it as a flashlight. We saw footprints. Human footprints. Me and Parker went, "Oh, hell no," and went inside, locked the door, and we barricaded the shit out of it. Emma asked if it was Josh. Matt shot down that idea. Josh was far too nice, not the stock innocent campers type. Suddenly, we heard a knock on the back door. "Hey, open up," said a voice that sounded exactly like Josh. Emma snapped, "Go to hell." It was out of character for her. It almost seemed territorial. The thing outside stopped. It began circling the Airbnb, tapping on the walls, before seeming to leave. We all decided to just go back to sleep. Day 2. The events of the previous night were still imprinted into our brains. We made breakfast, which Emma swallowed up like it was her last meal. We agreed to cut the trip short. After breakfast, we packed up and went outside only to find my van's tires slashed. Shit. Our phones didn't have service due to the storm the previous night, and the closest town was a mile or so away. If we wanted to get new tires, we'd have to push the car through the forest for a mile, but we didn't have a choice. We put C in the car, along with Emma, and me, Parker, and Matt began to push. However, we stopped. Yeah, it'd be hard, even harder downhill. The road winds and twist. It'll roll downhill and right into a tree if we'd push it. We were trapped. We accepted defeat and just went back inside the Airbnb. I silently prayed that we wouldn't have to stay a second night in this God-forsaken place. Emma kept getting hungry and ate through a majority of our snacks. Everyone was getting weirded out by her behavior. I went outside to look at the tracks from the previous night. Human, yes, absolutely. I followed them. I wasn't stupid, so I didn't follow them into the tree lines. I saw how they seemed to shift into that of a bear. I stepped back and ran back to the Airbnb. Before entering, I saw a truck pass and waved them down. It was Josh. He thanked me for letting him cook dinner for himself at the fire pit. Josh then looked at my van and saw the slashed tires. "Damn," he said. "What happened?" "I don't know," I told him. I then asked if he was outside the Airbnb last night. Josh looked at me and said that his home is decently far from here. He was not here. Josh, however, said something that almost made me jump. He could attach my van to his truck and drive us to the town. I agreed and thanked him. I ran inside to get the others. We watched from the porch as Josh knelt by the hitch. Eventually, he let us get in and began driving us to the town. I was in the passenger seat of his truck, while the others were crammed in the van. I looked at the tree line. I could swear I could see a shadow dash between the trees. Josh broke the silence and asked where I was from. I told him, and he laughed, a nervous laugh. Josh glanced towards the trees and asked if I had seen that too. I froze. He had seen it too. That thing between the trees. I could see Josh started to panic slightly. He pressed harder on the gas. Whatever was out there, it was chasing us. It didn't want us to leave. Josh honked the horn in a clear attempt to scare it away, but it didn't. We noticed the most putrid odor that I have ever smelt. It was so pungent that even with the windows closed, we could still smell it. It followed us all the way until we made it to the town. Josh drove us to the car shop and unattached my van. We paid for new tires and put them on. Finally, we could leave. We thanked Josh one final time and then began driving all the way back to Iowa. I prayed it didn't follow us home. It didn't seem to follow us, and we drove back without issue except for Emma. She was off, a little more violent, and it even started freaking out C. She insisted on beef jerky instead of her typical spicy chips. She barely spoke after that, never replied to texts, never picked up our calls, and barely attended our college classes. None of it, in fact. Last I saw of her was recently, when she picked up C from his first day of school. She seemed off, thinner, hollow even. Eyes were sunken in. I walked up to her and tried talking with her. She said nothing and just got into her car. I spoke to C. He told me that he didn't feel safe with her anymore. I'm concerned for Emma and C. I don't know what happened to her. If anyone out there has any ideas of what I could do, please tell me, because I don't know what to do now. The stretched people of Appalachia. The Appalachian Trail attracts tourists from all over the world. Hiking it is considered a rite of passage to some, but the stunning views are what brought my friend and coworker Jeremy and me to the Smokies. We trekked out Saturday through the mountain trail in North Carolina, just below Tennessee, eager to witness the wildlife and brilliant fall landscapes. The sun cast warm beams through the spruce firs. The sky was a magnificent pinkish golden hue that resonated within me and filled me with a long-lost appreciation for this world. "Lovely, isn't it?" Jeremy stated. He bit into a granola bar with a hearty crunch, and a few crumbs landed in his fluffy black beard. He looked like a mid-20s Santa, rosy cheeks and all. Sure beats the office. I don't know, I kind of miss corporate meetings and the soothing sounds of the broken printer. Jeremy's smile widened. Or Greg scoffing at every email request he receives. Something very zen about that, too. Very soul-soothing, he joked back. All right, Office Max, let's hit the trail. The September chill was invigorating, although it was a bit colder than I'd dressed for. I pulled up the hood on my jacket and followed Jeremy's lead, a bit surprised at seeing my stocky friend hiking up the incline so effortlessly. This was the first time we'd done anything together, aside from knocking back beers over pool games or the occasional meal out. He married young and usually reserved day trips like these for his wife. She was out west with her family this time, and I was happy to oblige his offer. Twigs cracked beneath my boots as I followed Jeremy. The trees were brilliant gradients of orange, yellow, and green. Basswoods, dogwoods, and magnolias popped in a vibrant patchwork panorama. It was truly breathtaking, and I appreciated Jeremy inviting me along on the nature walk. But then, an hour in, Jeremy decided to stray from the plotted path. We'd rounded a few narrow dirt paths to reach an overhang where Jeremy wanted to take a photo. It was an exposed face of the mountain offering a clear view of a valley below. It was obvious why he decided to take a detour for a photo op. It was gorgeous. I wheezed, a bit out of breath, as we finally climbed up the steep ridge. He slapped a gloved hand on my shoulder and I smiled into the phone's camera lens as well. He'd framed a great pic of us with the enormous valley behind us, but then the device slipped from his hand and onto the steep dirt hill. We watched it tumble down into the dense cluster of trees at the bottom. "Fuck!" Jeremy yelled. I really didn't look forward to climbing all the way down, then all the way back up again. "Is it cool if I stay here while you get it?" I asked, eager for a break. My calves were sore and tight, and I was out of breath. "Man, you're such an indoor kid," he smirked. I shrugged. He wasn't wrong. "Sure, I'll see you in a bit." I watched Jeremy descend the steep incline, winding down off the path and into the stark shadows of the woods. "Just keep calling it so I can follow the ring." "No prob," I called back, and Jeremy, just a small form among the valley of pines, vanished. I only then realized how utterly isolated this area of the forest was. We hadn't come across another hiker in over 45 minutes, and I gathered our little detour from the main trail must have taken longer than I'd thought. Aside from the rustling of leaves and the occasional creaking of swaying branches, it was quiet. A loud snapping sound echoed up from the basin. A tree branch, more than likely. I dialed Jeremy's number, and soon after, I heard a very faint ringtone. The phone must have tumbled farther than I realized. I shook my head, well aware his screen was likely shattered, and he'd be using mine for photos the rest of the hike. I heard the ringing phone continue for a bit, then stop as it went to voicemail. "See it?" I yelled down the side of the steep incline. The cold air was starting to numb my cheeks. Winter was on its way. No response from Jeremy. I redialed, then listened to the faint ringing from the deep woods below. When it finally went to voicemail once again, I felt a bit anxious. "Jeremy?" I yelled down. A woodpecker's rapid knocking carried over the valley from some unseen tree, but no other sound at all. "Jeremy, you okay?" I shouted down. Only the rattling groans of the trees and occasional cracking of branches was heard from below. I decided to go check on him. Hiking down the decline was easy, but I was well aware the climb back up was waiting. I was careful not to slip as I left the trail and edged my way down into the thick wooded valley where Jeremy had vanished. The pines had looked so small from up on the path, but as I descended, I realized they were enormous. It was a dense wilderness in the basin. Light barely penetrated the intertwined pine needles and leaves. "Jeremy," I called out. I should have been within hearing distance, but he still didn't respond. I called his phone once again. It rang, close by. I followed the sound, spotting it a few meters ahead on the forest floor. Sure enough, the screen was cracked, but it had miraculously survived. Then I noticed something white and pearl-like on the forest floor. I walked closer and squatted down to analyze it. My guts shifted and my throat closed a bit as I realized what I was looking at, a human tooth. "Hey Jeremy, are you okay?" I called out. I'd seen him reach the bottom, so I knew he hadn't fallen. Might not be his, I thought, and I peered into the endless pillars of tree trunks that sprawled out into the valley. Though hesitant, I decided to walk a bit in. "Jeremy!" I yelled into the woods. I could hear my own voice faintly echo off the surrounding mountains. I tried to rationalize that maybe Jeremy had just headed a bit inward to relieve himself, but I was getting a bit scared. I felt the fall leaves and pine needles soften my steps as I continued on. I then saw another small, white shape on the ground. It was a bloody human molar, roots and all. The leaves surrounding it were flecked with droplets of fresh red blood. Any notion of bravery was quickly abandoned due to the fact those teeth landed there recently. I needed to get out of the woods and call the police. I turned back and headed towards the wood's edge in a brisk walk, wishing it was closer. I was a good 30 meters in, and I quickened my pace into a brisk jog. I felt a wave of relief when I saw his hand around a tree up ahead. "Jeremy," I yelled out, but my jog slowed to a stop and my insides went cold. The hand wasn't as far away as I'd thought it was. Its size had created an optical illusion of sorts. It wasn't Jeremy's. It had long white fingers and bulbous knuckles, and looked distorted as if a normal human hand had been elongated, somehow stretched out to become twice the length. Worry melted into horror as a large, strange head peeked out from the other side of the thick tree. It was horrible. A mess of pale, saggy flesh that clung loosely to an enormous, stretched skull. A bizarre, exaggerated grin that split the face in two was filled with little pointed nubs of teeth, glistening red. There was no visible nose amid the folds of bunched flesh under the eyes, which were the worst feature by far. The eyes were perfectly spherical, white orbs, glossy and wet, that stared at me with eagerness, the way an animal stares at its food. I froze, unable to peel my gaze away from the hideous face that leered at me from behind the tree. It was far too high up as well, nearly 8 feet up from the leafy ground, though it was clearly hunched. I took a hesitant step backward, and as I did, it emerged. Long soap-white arms and legs extended from the cover of the thick tree trunk. With knobby knees and pronounced ribs, it resembled a person suffering from starvation, or perhaps extreme anorexia, yet scaled up to the size of a giant. I stepped back a bit more, my boot squishing into something. I glimpsed down to see a mound of pulpy flesh beneath my boot. It was half of a human hand, a wedding band on the base of a finger missing the tip. It was Jeremy's hand. I then heard what might have been misconstrued as the wind bending those tall trees. That thing was making the sound. It took a long stride in my direction, the horrible gash of a grin dripping strings of saliva in anticipation. I ran. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I fled. Adrenaline pumped through me as I ran deeper into the dense woods, away from that horrific giant. Wisps of ragged branches scratched my face and snagged my jeans. I soon passed shreds of clothing, chips of bone, and clumps of hair. I ran past stripped finger bones and even a meatless femur. All that remained of Jeremy were the inedible parts. I was going to die in those woods. I slowed my pace when I saw movement up ahead in the distance. 2 naked figures, slender, absurdly tall, and terribly deformed, stalked the woods with the same wide, bulging white eyes and hideous grins. They hadn't spotted me yet. My heart was pounding so hard I feared they'd hear it. I looked back, seeing that long-limbed thing striding forward. I was pinned. My only chance was to hide. I frantically scanned the area and found a wide-trunked tree that looked rotted and hollowed near the roots. It seemed like the best shot, so I raced over and squeezed myself into the hollowed base of the tree, ignoring the tearing of my jacket and the burn from scraping my skin in the process. I hushed my breathing and waited as still and as quietly as I could. A few minutes later, the sound of cracking of twigs and crushed leaves drew closer. I watched through a gap in the bark as panic flooded my mind. That strange vocalization sounded once again, followed by another voice from further out in the dense forest. They were communicating. A few other rattlings, throaty sounds were made before I heard the sound of footsteps continue on, getting quieter and quieter as they continued on into the woods. I breathed out in relief, but then the view to the woods was blocked by a long, horrific face. One of those things had leaned down to look into the open gap and was now staring directly at me, just a foot away. It was enormous, twice the height of my own head. Those milky white eyes stared at me, and I was sure these were my final moments. The dripping smile of that creature quivered, and it cocked its head slightly to the side. After a few seconds of reeling from the horror of its presence, I understood it wasn't seeing me at all. It was blind. Its breath was rotten and gamey. It wheezed through those small, sharp teeth and stared at me with those unseeing eyes for a few minutes. But it eventually stood, vanishing from my view. I then listened to the leaves rustle as it walked away, off to some other section of the vast forest. I stayed in that hollow of the trunk for maybe an hour before I finally braved peeking out. They were gone. I was cautious to make little noise as I backtracked as best I could. I feared I'd lost my way and was heading deeper still, towards those enormous things, but the mountainsides soon became visible through the leaves. I'd gotten back to the area I'd found Jeremy's detached, mangled hand, but it was gone. The cell phone was too, as well as the teeth. Nothing remained of my friend. I climbed out of the valley and began my return, all the while making calls to the park rangers and the local police. By the time I'd made it back to the car, it was surrounded by patrol cars as well as an ambulance. Officers, rangers, and paramedics were milling about, and they all were eager to question me. I explained the events that had transpired. The police were skeptical, as were the paramedics and rangers, but one weathered older park ranger named Bob took me aside after the statements were made. Bob looked at me with remorse. He then looked out into the sea of trees and spoke. My grandfather told me a folk tale when I was a child. one that terrified me, one he swore was real, the story of the stretched people of Appalachia. It was an old tale of a family that fell into a cave and were trapped ages ago. Incest and evolution kept them going. The kids with the longest limbs were kept alive, the others used for food. Evolution in the cave took their sight, but selective breeding heightened their stature bit by bit each following generation. I wished it to be a scary story to keep kids in line. I never wanted to believe him when he said he saw one in his youth from the mouth of a hidden cave. I never wanted to believe they were real. Bob's eyes grew wide, and his voice quivered with fear as he continued. Or that they could eventually grow tall enough to get out. My girlfriend and I were chased by a satanic cult in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. This happened in the summer of 2017. My girlfriend and I are from St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. We both attended university there and decided to take a road trip through the United States to celebrate our graduation. Our destination was Miami, Florida. Her family owns a condo near the beach, so we had a free place to stay. We decided to drive instead of fly because we wanted to see a bit of the country on the way down and visit a few friends. The trip usually takes about 20 to 24 hours by car nonstop, and we were planning on making multiple stops. The first part of the road trip was a wonderful experience. We went shopping in Buffalo, then made our way down to Pittsburgh and managed to catch a Pirates game. However, once we hit West Virginia, things changed. It was nothing but endless wilderness and a few small towns sprinkled in between. We had plans to meet up with some friends for dinner in Charlotte, North Carolina, so we wanted to get through West Virginia ASAP. We only made stops when we absolutely had to. We ended up stopping for gas at a pretty remote spot. My girlfriend and I got out of the car. I started pumping gas and she went inside to use the washroom and pick up some snacks. My tank was about half full when I heard a voice behind me ask, "Y'all lost?" I looked behind me and saw a middle-aged white man with long, messy brown hair that reached down to his shoulders, and an unkempt beard with dashes of grays and what looked to be drops of dried-up mucus. His clothes were torn up and dirty, and he smelled like a mixture of beer, sweat, pee, and feces. He was a little overweight, but pretty tall. I'm 6 feet, and he was about 4 inches taller than me. The teeth he still had left were a yellowish brown. On his right cheek, just under his eye, was a tattoo of some kind of pentagram. I'm pretty into YouTube videos about true crime and cults, so I was able to recognize what it was pretty quickly. He was standing very close to my face, to the point where the smell of his breath was making me dizzy, so I backed up. "No, sir, just passing through," I said nervously. "Not too often we see tourists passing through these parts," he responded. "Where you headed?" As he said this, he moved even closer than he was before. I had my back up against my car, and I couldn't move back any further. I wanted to get away from this guy as quickly as possible, but the car was still filling up with gas, and my girlfriend was still inside the gas station. I didn't want this dude to know where we were really going, so I told him I was visiting family in Kentucky, and they were expecting us. After I said this, he cracked a weird half smile, opening his mouth just wide enough for me to get a look at his teeth again. I'll never forget that face. His bloodshot eyes were staring deep into my soul. He let out a weird and sinister laugh. "How lovely," he said. "I'll see you kids around." Then he walked away. I was very relieved that he walked away, but also terrified by his last remarks. I didn't even see him when we pulled up to the gas station. So how did he know I wasn't alone? I figured he must have been watching my girlfriend and I when we arrived. The car was finally filled up, and I saw my girlfriend walking toward the car with bags full of snacks for the road. I noticed the weird guy was still at the gas station. He was a few pumps away from us, leaning up against an old red pickup truck, but to my utter discomfort, he wasn't alone. There were 2 other men and 1 woman with him, making the group 4 in total. The 2 men were just as big as he was, but they had shaved heads. One of them was wearing a dirty white tank top, and the other had no shirt on at all. The woman was shorter, about 5 feet 5. She was very skinny with heavy bags under her eyes and long blonde hair. They all looked like they had been living in the woods for the past 10 years. They were staring and pointing at us, talking amongst themselves. As soon as my girlfriend got to the car, I urgently told her to get in. I'm usually a pretty calm guy, so when my girlfriend noticed I was kind of freaking out, she knew something was up. We quickly entered the car, I locked the doors, and I began hauling ass out of the gas station. As we pulled around their red truck to the exit, I noticed there was another pentagram painted on the hood. I also noticed the skull of a goat or ram on their windshield. The 4 people began getting into their truck as they saw us leaving. I knew they were going to follow us as soon as we left. I explained the situation to my girlfriend as we were speeding away from the gas station. We were zooming down the road, and I looked in my rearview mirror. As I expected, the red truck was right behind us. I sped up even more, and they did too. I made a left, they did too. I made a full U-turn, and they did as well. My girlfriend managed to get reception and dialed 911. We gave the operator our location, and they gave us directions to the nearest police station. The operator also asked for the license plate, but the truck didn't have any. Once we were off the phone with them, my girlfriend stuck her cell phone outside of the window and started pointing to it, letting the creeps know we called the police. They finally got the message and stopped following us. We arrived to the police station and filed a report. We gave them the description of the truck and suspects. The investigator said they would call us if they had any more information. We were extremely shaken, but also relieved. All we wanted to do at that point was get the hell out of West Virginia. We thought we had shaken the group for good, but unfortunately, we were wrong. We decided to drive through the night to cover as much ground as possible. The area of Appalachia we were in had no streetlights, and I could only see what my headlights allowed me to see. Everything was fine until I noticed 2 headlights in my rear-view mirror. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but I kept an eye on them. The headlights got closer and closer until they were tailgating us. To my complete shock and horror, it was the same red truck from the gas station. These people had somehow found us again and were right behind us. "It's them!" I yelled. My girlfriend began to freak out and dialed 911. I floored the gas pedal, not even knowing what was 10 meters in front of me. All we cared about was escaping. We got a mile up the road until my girlfriend yelled, "Watch out!" There were 3 dead cows blocking the narrow road. I slammed on the brakes. The red truck was right behind us, and we couldn't go forward. We knew we fell into a trap. All of the sudden, a naked man wearing a goat mask darted from out of the woods and began hitting our car with what looked like a large axe. The naked man got on the hood of our car and started making sheep noises. My girlfriend was still on the phone with 911, but all she could do was scream. The people behind us got out of the red truck and began walking toward our car. 2 of them had rifles and 1 of them had a large machete. I knew what I had to do. I put the car into reverse and floored it. The naked man fell off our car. We smashed into the truck and I managed to knock it into a ditch. After the truck was out of the way, I pulled the fastest U-turn of my life and we got out of there. The people were yelling all kinds of obscenities at us as we drove away. I drove as fast as I could away from these people until we finally arrived in a town and filed another police report. My girlfriend and I were uninjured, thankfully, but we were extremely traumatized. The car was still drivable after that, so we were able to get the fuck out of West Virginia the next morning. This entire experience made my girlfriend and I scared to do any more road trips. I still call the local police department in West Virginia once in a while to see if they have any leads on these people, but so far, they have not found anything. The fact that these people were able to find us after we went to the police station and drove far away still scares and baffles me to this day. Who knows what kind of sick and twisted things this cult had planned if they managed to catch us. Stay safe out there, everyone. My girlfriend and I were chased by a satanic cult in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. This happened in the summer of 2017. My girlfriend and I are from St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. We both attended university there and decided to take a road trip through the United States to celebrate our graduation. Our destination was Miami, Florida. Her family owns a condo near the beach, so we had a free place to stay. We decided to drive instead of fly because we wanted to see a bit of the country on the way down and visit a few friends. The trip usually takes about 20 to 24 hours by car nonstop, and we were planning on making multiple stops. The first part of the road trip was a wonderful experience. We went shopping in Buffalo, then made our way down to Pittsburgh and managed to catch a Pirates game. However, once we hit West Virginia, things changed. It was nothing but endless wilderness and a few small towns sprinkled in between. We had plans to meet up with some friends for dinner in Charlotte, North Carolina, so we wanted to get through West Virginia ASAP. We only made stops when we absolutely had to. We ended up stopping for gas at a pretty remote spot. My girlfriend and I got out of the car. I started pumping gas and she went inside to use the washroom and pick up some snacks. My tank was about half full when I heard a voice behind me ask, "Y'all lost?" I looked behind me and saw a middle-aged white man with long, messy brown hair that reached down to his shoulders, and an unkempt beard with dashes of grays and what looked to be drops of dried-up mucus. His clothes were torn up and dirty, and he smelled like a mixture of beer, sweat, pee, and feces. He was a little overweight, but pretty tall. I'm 6 feet, and he was about 4 inches taller than me. The teeth he still had left were a yellowish brown. On his right cheek, just under his eye, was a tattoo of some kind of pentagram. I'm pretty into YouTube videos about true crime and cults, so I was able to recognize what it was pretty quickly. He was standing very close to my face, to the point where the smell of his breath was making me dizzy, so I backed up. "No, sir, just passing through," I said nervously. "Not too often we see tourists passing through these parts," he responded. "Where you headed?" As he said this, he moved even closer than he was before. I had my back up against my car, and I couldn't move back any further. I wanted to get away from this guy as quickly as possible, but the car was still filling up with gas, and my girlfriend was still inside the gas station. I didn't want this dude to know where we were really going, so I told him I was visiting family in Kentucky, and they were expecting us. After I said this, he cracked a weird half smile, opening his mouth just wide enough for me to get a look at his teeth again. I'll never forget that face. His bloodshot eyes were staring deep into my soul. He let out a weird and sinister laugh. "How lovely," he said. "I'll see you kids around." Then he walked away. I was very relieved that he walked away, but also terrified by his last remarks. I didn't even see him when we pulled up to the gas station. So how did he know I wasn't alone? I figured he must have been watching my girlfriend and I when we arrived. The car was finally filled up, and I saw my girlfriend walking toward the car with bags full of snacks for the road. I noticed the weird guy was still at the gas station. He was a few pumps away from us, leaning up against an old red pickup truck, but to my utter discomfort, he wasn't alone. There were 2 other men and 1 woman with him, making the group 4 in total. The 2 men were just as big as he was, but they had shaved heads. One of them was wearing a dirty white tank top, and the other had no shirt on at all. The woman was shorter, about 5 feet 5. She was very skinny, with heavy bags under her eyes and long blonde hair. They all looked like they had been living in the woods for the past 10 years. They were staring and pointing at us, talking amongst themselves. As soon as my girlfriend got to the car, I urgently told her to get in. I'm usually a pretty calm guy, so when my girlfriend noticed I was kind of freaking out, she knew something was up. We quickly entered the car, I locked the doors, and I began hauling ass out of the gas station. As we pulled around their red truck to the exit, I noticed there was another pentagram painted on the hood. I also noticed the skull of a goat or ram on their windshield. The 4 people began getting into their truck as they saw us leaving. I knew they were going to follow us as soon as we left. I explained the situation to my girlfriend as we were speeding away from the gas station. We were zooming down the road, and I looked in my rearview mirror. As I expected, the red truck was right behind us. I sped up even more, and they did too. I made a left, they did too. I made a full U-turn, and they did as well. My girlfriend managed to get reception and dialed 911. We gave the operator our location, and they gave us directions to the nearest police station. The operator also asked for the license plate, but the truck didn't have any. Once we were off the phone with them, my girlfriend stuck her cell phone outside of the window and started pointing to it. letting the creeps know we called the police. They finally got the message and stopped following us. We arrived to the police station and filed a report. We gave them the description of the truck and suspects. The investigator said they would call us if they had any more information. We were extremely shaken, but also relieved. All we wanted to do at that point was get the hell out of West Virginia. We thought we had shaken the group for good, but unfortunately, we were wrong. We decided to drive through the night to cover as much ground as possible. The area of Appalachia we were in had no streetlights, and I could only see what my headlights allowed me to see. Everything was fine until I noticed 2 headlights in my rear-view mirror. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but I kept an eye on them. The headlights got closer and closer until they were tailgating us. To my complete shock and horror, it was the same red truck from the gas station. These people had somehow found us again and were right behind us. "It's them!" I yelled. My girlfriend began to freak out and dialed 911. I floored the gas pedal, not even knowing what was 10 meters in front of me. All we cared about was escaping. We got a mile up the road until my girlfriend yelled, "Watch out." There were 3 dead cows blocking the narrow road. I slammed on the brakes. The red truck was right behind us, and we couldn't go forward. We knew we fell into a trap. All of the sudden, a naked man wearing a goat mask darted from out of the woods and began hitting our car with what looked like a large axe. The naked man got on the hood of our car and started making sheep noises. My girlfriend was still on the phone with 911, but all she could do was scream. The people behind us got out of the red truck and began walking toward our car. 2 of them had rifles and 1 of them had a large machete. I knew what I had to do. I put the car into reverse and floored it. The naked man fell off our car. We smashed into the truck and I managed to knock it into a ditch. After the truck was out of the way, I pulled the fastest U-turn of my life and we got out of there. The people were yelling all kinds of obscenities at us as we drove away. I drove as fast as I could away from these people until we finally arrived in a town and filed another police report. My girlfriend and I were uninjured, thankfully, but we were extremely traumatized. The car was still drivable after that, so we were able to get the fuck out of West Virginia the next morning. This entire experience made my girlfriend and I scared to do any more road trips. I still call the local police department in West Virginia once in a while to see if they have any leads on these people, but so far, they have not found anything. The fact that these people were able to find us after we went to the police station and drove far away still scares and baffles me to this day. Who knows what kind of sick and twisted things this cult had planned if they managed to catch us. Stay safe out there, everyone. Don't visit the Appalachians. I don't like to use the term skinwalker to describe the hellspawn that wander the Appalachian mountains. I say this because the only people that believe in skinwalkers are the ones who have actually seen them. I sure as hell didn't believe in any such thing until about 2 weeks ago. The Appalachian Mountains had always been a place that I wanted to visit. The pictures on Google were enough for me. The place is fucking beautiful. I had heard a few stories about skinwalkers roaming around the mountains during the night, which just made it all the more interesting. So I saved up some money, rented a cabin, and flew out here to experience the mountain lifestyle for a couple of weeks. The first few days were completely normal. I had gotten settled in and felt completely fine. Hiking some surrounding trails is all that I can recall for the first 3 or 4 days. It was on that 5th day that everything began going to shit. The cabin that I had rented had 2 big floodlights facing the backyard. Every night a coyote would walk past my cabin, causing the lights to turn on. I thought nothing of it. It was honestly kinda cute. On the 5th night of my stay, I was sitting in the living room watching some satellite TV. In the corner of my eye, I saw the floodlights flick on. I jumped up to go see my new coyote friend through the window. Let's just say that whatever caused my floodlights to turn on that night was not a fucking coyote. Its body looked completely normal except for the legs. The legs were extremely long and skinny, probably 3 times longer than any normal coyote. The thing just stared at me. My fight or flight didn't kick in. All I could do was stare back into its empty eyes. This fucking creature then let out the loudest, most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard, then got even closer to the window. I turned around to grab my phone so I could call the police. As I was walking to the couch, the floodlights turned off. The soft glow of the old TV screen was the only thing lighting the living room. I grabbed my phone and sprinted upstairs to my room. My first instinct was to hide in the closet, so I did just that. The closet doors had little slits in them so I could kinda see what was going on outside. I picked up my phone and tried to call the police. There was one slight problem though. My phone was fucking dead. It was around this point that I heard knocking coming from my front door. The knocking continued for what felt like an hour. I literally had no idea what to do, so I just sat there, hoping that it would stop. It eventually did stop, but shortly after, I heard the door open. No kicking the door in or anything, it just opened. I started to cry. I could hear faint footsteps getting louder and faster as it went up the stairs. It eventually got to my room, where I thought I was dead for sure. I could hear it opening drawers and messing with my bed sheets. I peered through one of the slits in the door, but I couldn't really see anything. That was until the creature put its disgusting, rotting face right up against the door. It was breathing so loudly that it was hurting my ears. I pushed myself back into a corner and used one of my jackets to cover me. It was my last option. I don't know how long I sat there, but it felt like an eternity. I eventually peeked out from behind my jacket to see some light coming through the doors. I stood up and looked out. It was daytime. I couldn't hear the creature anymore. I assumed that it got spooked by the sunlight and left. I slowly opened my closet door. It was finally safe. Needless to say, I got the fuck out of there, and I'm never going back. I don't want to see a therapist because they won't believe me. They'll think I'm insane. Maybe I am insane. I don't know. All I know is that whenever the locals of the Appalachian Mountains talk about these things, they aren't lying. Don't go traveling through the Appalachian Trail at night. You never know what's out there. I had never been one to believe in the ghost stories my Uncle Ralph told me. They were always long and drawn out, never straight to the point, and frankly, not very convincing. Growing up on the Appalachian Trail, he often warned me to be wary of what lurked in the shadows after dark. But being the type of person who needed to see something to believe it, I never paid much attention. That is until last night. As I write this now, safe and sound in the comfort of my home, I hope that recounting the events of what happened will bring me some peace. But I know that what I experienced will stay with me forever. It was a night that sent shivers down my spine and made me a firm believer in everything my Uncle Ralph had ever said about the woods. I had been visiting my Uncle Ralph to pick up the deed to his home. He had been growing sicker by the day, and I knew I needed to act quickly. As I packed up the papers and prepared to leave, Uncle Ralph gave me a serious look. "Are you sure you want to go out there this late?" he asked. "You know how these woods get after dark. They can be downright spooky." I tried to brush off his concerns with a light-hearted laugh. "I have to get home, Uncle Ralph," I replied. "My mom will start to worry if I'm not back soon. Besides, it's not like anything's going to happen." But my uncle didn't seem convinced. "Please, let me give you some advice," he said, and I nodded, and he continued on. "Don't look into the trees. If you see anything, don't acknowledge it. If you hear anything, don't turn around, walk away, and don't call out to it. And if you hear footsteps, for the love of God, don't run. You'll only make things worse." I mentally rolled my eyes at his cautionary words. At that time, I did not believe a single thing that came out of his mouth. I should have. "Thanks, Uncle Ralph," I said, trying to sound grateful. "I'll keep that in mind." Uncle Ralph did not seem to catch the hint that I was unwilling to stay for longer than I had to. "Why don't you stay the night?" "I could drive you?" Uncle Ralph asked me with a hopeful look, but I shook my head no, and he continued on. "It's just, I'm worried. I don't want anything to happen to you. I'll be fine. Plus, there's still sunlight left. But if you keep talking, there won't be. I said with a light-hearted laugh, hoping to ease the tension that Uncle Ralph had created when he dived into one of the fantasies they liked to spew around town. It was common among the old folks who lived on the trail to be mesmerized by the kinds of tales, some saying that they have seen something of their own, or had known someone who has been taken by the creatures that live out there in the woods. Be safe, my dear. Remember, you aren't alone out there, whether you like it or not, Uncle Ralph said as I descended the steps of his home. His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I quickly brushed it off, just hoping that I can get home soon and lay in the comfort of my bed. Bye, Uncle Ralph, I said as I waved. I began my journey into the woods, unprepared for what would come. Everything is going to be fine, I thought to myself. Half a mile into my walk, I started to get an eerie feeling on the back of my neck, the feeling that I was being watched. I brushed it off as some animal looking at me, maybe a deer or a rabbit. So I kept walking. As I was walking, my shoe slowly came loose, and I had just noticed it now, a mile into my walk back home. So I bent down to tie my shoe, going quicker than I should have, because I wanted to get out of the woods. It was getting darker by the minute, and my mom will start to worry. But because of my lack of hand-eye coordination, I stumbled and had to start again. Damn it, I exclaimed quietly. My words must have set something off, because as soon as I said that, the whistling began. It could not have been the wind, because it was whistling a tune, one that I can't describe. For a second I thought it was the crows, because of their ability to mimic and all. But I still took it upon myself to look around, completely forgetting what Uncle Ralph had said. I instantly regretted my actions, because in the dense trees and brush on the side of the trail was a lanky figure with long limbs, watching me with eyes that seem as though they were glowing, and a large toothy smile that looks almost human-like. I quickly finished off my shoes and got up. I brushed whatever I saw off and pinned it on Uncle Ralph's words getting into my head and making me hallucinate, so I continued my walk, though the whistling continued, holding the belief that it was crows. It's been 2 miles now, and only half a mile left until I am in the comfort of my bed, passed out from exhaustion. I was never one to exercise, but living along the trail made me have to if I wanted to see my family members. That sensation that was on the back of my neck is still there. It seems to have intensified, but I was only focused on getting home. At that moment, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the woods, piercing the silence of the night. It was not just any scream, but a sound of a woman in excruciating pain and agony. Frozen in terror, I didn't know what to do. Uncle Ralph's words echoed in my head, telling me to ignore it, but the scream sounded too real to ignore. Feeling compelled to investigate, I called out, "Hello?" But the screaming and whistling stopped abruptly. A chill ran down my spine, and I started walking again, picking up the pace until I was almost jogging. However, Uncle Ralph's warning resurfaced in my mind, and I slowed down to a quick walking pace, hoping not to provoke anything lurking in the woods. There's only half a mile left, I thought to myself, trying to calm myself down. You're most likely just making things up and trying to scare yourself. I kept my head forward, kept a safe walking pace, and continued my trek home. God damn it, I think to myself, because now there were footsteps that sounded like someone was running, coming up behind me, and it was alarmingly fast. I abandoned everything that Uncle Ralph had told me to do, and I ran. I ran as fast as my legs could take me, without looking back. Whatever was behind me was catching up. I still didn't look back. I just run. And I don't think about anything besides running. I feel hot breath on my neck. It feels rancid and almost like it will burn through my skin, and something sharp digging into the back of my neck, causing searing pain. I cried out in agony, thrashing around and trying to fight it off. After that, I woke up panting and covered in sweat. This false hallucination was just a terrible nightmare. I am writing this still shaking. I have no idea how I had gotten home. I was still half a mile away from home. I remember the last thing I wrote in the journal was that it was all just a terrible nightmare. But I was wrong. When I woke up after writing it, I had gone to the bathroom and I had the sudden urge to check the back of my neck, so I did. And there they were, bright red claw marks on the back of my neck. I could have passed out then and there. Uncle Ralph was supposed to come over that day. He had forgotten to give me a document, so I can ask him about everything, even if it all seemed like it was just a silly dream and my mind playing tricks on me. That could be the only explanation for this, right? I remember going back to bed, but I remember seeing the figure that was looming in the woods in my closet, staring at me with its unblinking, glowing red eyes and that same toothy smile. A sense of dread washed over me. It began to move, slow and languidly, and its footsteps thumped against the carpet until it was inches away from my face. I could feel its hot breath on my face, one that could only be described as death. Its face seemed to have cut in half horizontally, and it let out a blood-curdling scream, a sound so deafening it felt as though my eardrums were about to burst. The scream seemed to have gone on forever, echoing through the empty halls, and filled the entire room with a sense of terror and dread. Though, just as suddenly as it began, the screaming stopped. The figure disappeared, leaving me alone in the dark with nothing but the ringing in my ears. Dash, dash. That night, Uncle Ralph had come over, bringing the documents we needed in case something happened to him. He looked different this time that I saw him, almost paler and skinnier. We were talking for a while, just about family and what had occurred until it was time to go. It was an hour before sunset, and I didn't want Uncle Ralph driving through the woods alone. As Uncle Ralph got into his car, he turned to look at me. Then, at that moment, he had the same glowing red eyes and the same toothy grin that the creature that was in my room had. I felt my blood run cold. Remember, you are never truly alone. The thing that was supposed to be my Uncle Ralph said. It let out the same blood-curdling scream and sped off into the dense woods. I stood there stunned, unsure of what to do, and what had just happened. Was I still dreaming? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. The creature that had taken a hold of my Uncle Ralph was now looming in the shadows, looking at me, and it raised its thin, leather-like skinned arm and waved its talon-like fingers slowly, seeming to attempt to mimic what seemed like a wave. The Appalachian Horror. I grew up in southern Appalachia in western North Carolina, 30 minutes outside of the town of Asheville. The hills and hollers of the Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest mountains in the world, with some of the rock formations dating back over 1 billion years. That quite literally means they were here before there were terrestrial animals. As with most things that have been on the earth a long time, there are inexplicable anomalies, both benevolent and malevolent. For example, the Brown Mountain Lights. Never in my life have I felt threatened or uneasy when witnessing them from Wiseman's view. They're neither good nor evil, they just are. On the benevolent side, sometimes when you walk through an abandoned old church up near Mom and Dad's property line, you can feel good, warm, and happy energy. It's like that first warm day of summer, when the sunshine is not too hot, but it's not cold. Well, this story is not about one such anomaly. It's about something that was definitely malevolent. About a decade ago, I was in night school up at AB Tech, going to school for automotive mechanics. I would go into class at about 2 p.m. after I got off my part-time job, and I would end up getting home at about 10:30 p.m., depending on traffic. Every night I drove the same road, in my old 1973 W200 Dodge pickup. Some nights it would get rather boring, and I would take a different route, jump off of I-40, and drive the back roads. On this particular evening, I had decided to just stay on I-40 because I just wanted to go home and go to bed. It was Thursday, and there was no class on Friday, and I wanted to get in bed early so I could go out into the woods and go hiking early tomorrow morning and watch the sun come up. As I jumped off of I-40 onto the exit where my parents lived, the night seemed to get darker, and none of the animals that I could hear through my rolled-down windows made any more noise. The cab of my truck became smaller and smaller, and my breathing quickened. I have never faced any kind of anxiety in my life, but at that moment something felt off, and there was no way I could put my finger on what it was. I came to a stop on the exit ramp, turned to go down the road and I happened to notice that the gas station off the exit where Mom and Dad lived had no lights on. They were a 24-hour truck stop and always had lights on, but I didn't think about it again after noticing. I just chalked it up to the power being out, but I could not shake the feeling that something was definitely askew. I slowly shifted through all of my old truck's gears, not wanting to make any more noise than an old pickup already did. I leaned over my steering wheel to look up at the moon through the windshield, and there were barely any stars visible, which was way out of the ordinary. If you've ever been to Appalachia, primarily the sparsely populated areas where I'm from, you can see the Milky Way on clear nights. An absence of stars back home is only due to cloud cover or whatever in the hell went on this particular night. As I rounded a particularly sharp left-hand curve and chugged through a straight stretch before the next right-hander, I looked at the ancient, decaying barn I always gazed at when riding that stretch of road, and thought about how long that thing had been here, and how many advancements and civilization it had seen. For the split second that my gaze wandered, a very large, sickly-looking dog ran out in front of my truck, no more than 10 feet in front of me. Old Betsy was a good truck, but she didn't stop well. Thump, thump. I heard the fence posts I had left in my truck bounce up out of my bed and then back into it as I slid to a stop. My first thought was, oh God, now I have to go tell these neighbors that I ran over their dog. That shit doesn't go real far with people around here. It can really kind of set them off, depending on the dog and the person. As I sat there breathing in the smell of burning rubber, something else found its way into my nose. The stench of rotting flesh. It's not a smell you ever forget once you smell it one time. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. I just chalked it up to some rotting roadkill nearby. Finally, I thought to myself, let me go check and see who this dog belongs to. I pushed my clutch in, shifted to reverse, and as I looked in my rearview mirror, illuminated by the haunting glow of my reverse lamps was the same dog, only it wasn't on 4 legs anymore. It had stood up like a man well over 10 feet tall. Only then did it dawn on me that the front of my truck was every bit of 5 feet tall, and this dog was every bit of 5 feet tall at the shoulder on all 4s. As it turned its head to look in the direction of my truck, I caught only a glimpse of this creature. It was not a dog. It was not a man. It was somewhere in between, and at the same time, entirely separate altogether. Its skin hung loose off of its emaciated and thin frame, like a raccoon. Bits of matted fur and dirt and mud clung to its legs like a disease. The right arm seemed a little longer than the left, and they both hung abnormally low in relation to either animal this creature seemed to be. As it regained its senses, it turned and looked into the mirror like it knew exactly where I was sitting. The face was that of a man's, but the very edges of its face seemed to not be totally defined. They seemed to move and change like something you would see at a cellular level in a scientific documentary. There were no eyes, but only sockets where eyes should have been, no hair, and the skin that was dripping off its face was a cold, lifeless gray color. The nose was short and shoved into its face, like a bulldog, but the teeth still haunt me. It was definitely carnivorous. And true to form of the rest of its unnatural look, many of the teeth didn't seem to be arranged in a natural way in its mouth. They seemed to fill and spill forth from the indefinable face, almost like they knew the horror they occupied and they were searching for a way out. It stared through my life, into my eyes, and past my soul. It seemed like an eternity, but it could not have been more than 5 seconds that I sat there, paralyzed. A light came on at the house next to the road, causing the creature to snap its gaze in that direction and tear off into the woods on its back, 2 legs, like a man. I jammed my old truck in first gear and roasted tires all the way through first, snatched second gear, and drove as fast as I could home. When I got to the house, both of my parents were asleep. I went downstairs into my bedroom and loaded every firearm I possessed and locked all of the doors. I couldn't wake them up. Who the fuck would believe that, and at 10:30 on a Thursday night? The basement was eerily quiet that night. Even their dogs that got up to raise hell at outside animals at all hours of the night were dead silent. The old post and beam house didn't even creak or pop that night, as was usual. At about 3 a.m., I started to finally get drowsy, and as I went to lay my head down to get some sleep, so I could still attempt to go hiking the next morning, I smelled the stench of death again. It was faint at first, but it was definitely there. I thought to myself, you're just going crazy. None of that shit was real. But as I dwelt on it, it became more and more noticeable until it filled the entire basement. My dad has a home office in the basement with 2 large glass doors that face Pisgah National Forest and impenetrable 500,000-acre woods. I finally worked up the courage to walk out of my bedroom and into the basement living room with my little tactical 12-gauge loaded tack light on. I covered the flashlight with my hand so as not to make my presence known until need be, and as I turned right out of the living room into my father's office, I shined the light through the glass doors, and at the edge of the woods, there stood the creature. It was motionless. It stared right into the light, unafraid, with those soulless sockets, devoid of eyes. I quickly covered my tactical light, ran into the living room, flipped on the outdoor floodlights, and to my surprise, it was no longer standing at the edge of the woods, but between the house and the edge of the woods, still motionless. I swung the door open and fired every round I had in its direction. I must have scored a couple of hits because it screeched an unearthly scream, like that of a woman being slaughtered as it took off into the woods. The dogs went crazy. Mom and Dad woke up asking me what the hell I was doing. I told them that a bear had gotten into the trash and I was scaring it away. They didn't believe me, but I knew they wouldn't believe the truth either. I didn't sleep that night, or any time until the following Sunday. Everything seemed to return to normal, and I didn't think about the creature again until I met my wife about 6 years later. Her mother's house sits at the mouth of the holler, no more than 4 or 5 miles up the road from my mother and father's. Up on the side of the holler there are kennels for her brother's hunting dogs, no longer in use and haven't been in years, but the fence is still there and the concrete pad is still there. It's a thing of great use when you need to quarantine an animal. Her Great Pyrenees had gotten into a tussle with a raccoon, which of course he destroyed, but his rabies vaccination had lapsed, so we had to keep him quarantined for a time. It didn't bother him. He kind of likes solitude. This particular night that we were coming home from a movie date in a neighboring town was the last night of quarantine for him. So we walked up the trail using our phone flashlights to get to the kennel, and there he sat, patiently waiting, tail wagging happy to see us. We put him on a leash and started walking back to the house with him. As we were walking back through the darkness, I started to feel the same feeling I had felt the night I hit the creature in my truck. I didn't say anything so as not to alarm my wife, but then the smell came wafting in on the breeze. She jokingly asked me, "My God, what did you eat? You stink." I half-ass laughed, not being able to fully appreciate the joke for the horrors that raged within my mind. She immediately caught on and asked me what was wrong, to which I could only reply, "I'll tell you later." She grew up in the woods and around hunting and things of that nature her whole life, so she knew what I meant. She knew we were being watched by something. When we could see the lights of the house from the trail to the kennel, we heard it. There came barking from the kennel that sounded just like the Great Pyrenees we had on a leash next to us. It was a perfect imitation. The Pyrenees, being a guardian dog, immediately sensed that something was wrong, and so he turned to face the danger, belting out deep barks and growls in that direction. I don't know if you've ever had to drag a 150-pound dog, but it sucks and is no easy task. I'm 6 feet tall and 240 pounds, and it was all I could do to get him back to the house. The barking never ceased the entire time we were running towards the house. In fact, it seemed to grow closer and closer until it seemed it was coming from inside my own head. Her mother heard the commotion and flipped the floodlights on as we made it into the fence of the yard, and I caught a glimpse of something coming to a dead stop at the end of where the light reached, wheeling around and tearing off back into the darkness. My wife looks at me and goes, "You want to tell me what the fuck that was?" To which I replied, "Yes, let's go inside." I told her the story, and she listened intently, hanging on every word. Her family came from a long line of granny witches and other supernatural healers of the Appalachians, so her older sister came over the next morning with some herbs and chants to bless the property and to ward off evil. I suggested we go up to the dog kennels and do them as well. When we got to the kennels, they were completely destroyed. The very concrete foundation was cracked and the chain link fence was torn off of its posts. The dog houses were destroyed and the place reeked of the stench that followed the creature. My wife's older sister just went about her business like normal, blessed the place, burnt some herbs, and led us back into the property. When we got in the house, she wheeled about on us suddenly and instructed us very firmly to never go into the woods after dark, not until this thing left me alone. To make a long story short, my wife joined the military and she ended up getting stationed in Delaware. Well, as someone who's lived around fairly large mountains and endless wilderness their entire life, Delaware is pretty terrible. At least that was my thought when we first moved into the middle of a 50,000 plus population city. Fortunately, though, it didn't take us long to find a house in a sleepy little community further south. We purchased the house and moved in with haste. We were both very grateful and glad to be out of the city and into a rural setting again. The land in Delaware seems lifeless in comparison to Appalachia. The sparsely populated woods don't possess any energy that goes one way or the other. The ground doesn't seem to be alive like it is in Appalachia. Having not thought about the creature in a long time, I resumed my staying outside after dark and playing with our dogs in our rather large yard that borders a small patch of woods. Well, last night I went outside to play with the dogs, and as dark set in, I built a decent-sized fire in my fire pit and consumed some good old-fashioned Appalachian mountain cough syrup from a mason jar. And just as the fire was dying down, my American bulldog tore off towards the woods. He has a habit of running off to go on adventures, so my immediate instinct was to chase him down in the yard and tackle him so he could not get away. As I tackled his 110-pound ass to the ground and threw him in a fireman's carry over my shoulders, I heard him begin to bark, only the bark was not coming from him. The only sound coming from him was a deep, rumbling growl, a noise I've never heard him make. It was a threatening noise. Something was definitely wrong, and as I ran with him on my shoulders back to the house, the stench of death again began to fill the air. The two other dogs must have caught wind of what was happening and met me at the back door, which I threw open, slammed shut, locked, and again loaded my firearms. How the hell could this thing have followed us 650 miles up here? As I flipped my floodlights on at the back side of my house, several of the bushes and small trees at the forest's edge were still shaking like something had just run through them. My dogs went crazy all night, barking and howling and attempting to get out the windows. I didn't sleep a bit, and I don't think I will for a while. I know for sure I won't be in the woods after dark ever again in my life, not until this thing is gone. Let me tell you what I saw in the Appalachian Mountains. Originally, I'm from West Virginia. I moved around between the Appalachian and the Midwest some as a kid. Between the ages of 10 to 13, I lived in rural Kentucky in the foothills of one of the oldest mountain ranges on the planet. I lived with my dad and my grams. We lived in what we call a holler. Think of it like a cul-de-sac in between a set of foothills. We lived in the middle of the neighborhood with nothing but family on both sides. No one lived across from us or behind us because of the foothills. When I moved in, my grams had some rules I had to follow. At the time, I chalked them up to hillbilly stranger danger. There were things like, don't mess around with the wild animals, don't go out into the woods alone. Then they got a little weird. Don't whistle. If you hear your name, don't answer and don't go to it. And if you see someone in the woods you might know, no you didn't, and just come home. This experience happened in August when I was 11. My dad and I had a mowed path through the tall grass and berry bushes to the left of the double wide we lived in. We camped out there a lot because it was close enough that we could check on my grams. Now when you're in the woods, things are louder than you think. You have animal life, bugs chattering, wind through the trees and grass. There was a stream that ran along the road you could easily hear. That night, we added the campfire to that list. My dad decided to go back up to the house about a quarter mile to get more beer and to check on grams. Before he left, he told me not to mess with the fire. After a few minutes of watching the fire, things started to get quiet. Like real quiet. The wind had all but stopped. Bug and animal sounds were all gone, and the stream sounded like it was miles away. I was getting uncomfortable, even though I've been left at the campground before like this. Then I started to smell and taste it. It was in the back of my throat, out of nowhere, this awful metal tang. After a few more moments of dread, my dad came back. He was mad right away, said he could smell burning metal coming up the trail. He accused me of tossing beer cans in the fire. I told him I didn't, and even pointed to the fire to prove it. He said there was a storm coming in, and we needed to get back home, and he let it go. We left the tent and started our way back. Now the very cool, but very weird thing about lightning in woods this dense is when the lighting hits, it lights up everything like the middle of the day. Well, up until the front of the trees. After the first set of trees, it's pitch black. There are no street lights, and unless you have lights on your property, it's completely black. So it's pitch black, lightly raining, and other than the dim lights from the house windows, there's nothing. I'm eating watermelon as one dose in August in the mountains. When the first clap of lightning hits, everything is as bright as it can be. After the second passes, it's pitch black. Next clap of lighting comes, and that's when I kind of see it. On the porch, past the yard, over the stream, past the road, and the ditches on either side just past the first line of trees, I could see the silhouette of it. Then it goes dark. This is also when I can't start to taste that same awful burning metal. I'm not really sure what I saw, so I just kind of stay still. It's a few moments before the lighting hits aging. The figure is now closer, standing side by side to the trees. Then it's back aging. I'm standing now, not sure what to do. It's been 20 years, to this day, and I've tried, but could never fully describe what I saw. This thing's head wasn't proportioned to its body. The arms were too long, and the torso didn't fit right. It was like if you asked a blind person to draw what a person looked like. It just didn't look correct. Once the lighting hit aging, the thing is standing in the middle of the road. Not wanting to see this thing get any closer, I go inside. My Grams is doing dishes and ask why I'm inside. I tell her I think I saw something. She almost immediately gets my dad on his feet, telling him to shut and lock all the windows and doors. My dad, vaguely drunk, obeys. That night, I slept with her. The next day, we discover the tent door is torn off. It didn't look like an animal. Things weren't cut or shredded, but looked like someone took and pulled it apart. My uncle, who lived a mile or so up, had all 8 chickens killed. Heads gone. No blood. The next few weeks, all the kids had to wait for the bus with an adult. My dad had to be late for work for almost 3 weeks. Anytime I tried to talk about it, I just had the subject change. I just figured I was a kid and it wasn't important or real. It wasn't until years later I finally understood. I was in my early 20s, and some cousins were in town for Halloween. As I was telling this story, my aunt got mad at me and said, "Don't you tell them that. Don't you put that evil on them." I couldn't help but think back on all the times I tried to talk about it and how I was shunned. My kid mind not realizing it wasn't as simple as a subject change, but then actively shushing me. Once I started dipping my toes in Reddit, I realized there was a name for this fucking thing. The same name my auntie had called it that day at the party, and other people have seen it, the Goat Man. What bothers me the most is how to this day I couldn't describe any feature, nor have I ever tasted that awful burning metal taste. So friends, if you ever find yourself in the foothills of Kentucky, please remember my Grams rules. I used to have a house in the Appalachian Mountains, and I have some stories to tell. Recently, I've seen creepy stories of mysterious creatures living in the depths of the Appalachian Mountains blow up on TikTok, so I wanted to share some stories I have of when I lived there. So, to set the scene, I used to have a house on the Maryland side of the Appalachian Mountains. We were pretty much completely stranded there, as the nearest neighbor was around 15 miles away. So we had to either go on huge supply runs to the nearest supermarket, which was even farther away, or hunt for food ourselves. Also, I forgot to mention, My mom always dreamt of going into a house or cabin in the deep woods, so we decided to live there for me and my sister's summer. Anyway, we alternated between hunting and going for supply runs. Now, I'll start telling the stories. The first one is when me and my mom went for a hike through the woods and found an abandoned Wild West amusement park called Ghost Town, probably like 20 minutes into the hike. Once we got there, we got a weird feeling that I cannot physically describe with words, like it just somehow appeared in front of us. Then probably no more than 15 minutes later, we found a huge abandoned hospital. We never knew it for the rest of our stay, but those two buildings were the Ghost Town Village located in North Carolina and the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia. We started in Maryland, somehow ended up in North Carolina, and then got to West Virginia and got back to Maryland in less than 2 hours. We stayed surrounded by woods the whole time, not crossing or seeing a single road. That was just the start of the weird shit that happened. The next story is when my mom took me and my sister to a supply run, and while we were driving, we saw a man with a thick jacket, glasses, a balaclava over his face, and a bicycle helmet trying to hitchhike with his thumb out. It was the middle of summer. Me and my sister told my mom to just keep driving, but she pulled over in the road and asked the guy, "Sir, are you okay?" He didn't respond. "Why are you out here dressed like that?" The man finally spoke, but something was off. His voice didn't sound like it belonged to him. It was too high, like it was put through a voice changer. "Ma'am, can I get a ride?" Completely disregarding my mom's question, I looked around him and noticed he had no bike, no car, no hiking stick, no backpack, no nothing. Just those clothes. I whispered to my mom to keep driving, and as soon as the man saw that she was trying to drive away, he let out an animalistic, inhuman scream and started to run towards us. My mom floored it to the nearest police station and reported the guy, but they never found him. On our way back to the house, we were on extreme edge, but nothing happened. Then that night, I woke up to a tapping sound on my window and woke up to the same man standing straight up with his hands on the glass. I lived on the second floor. Now, he didn't have his sunglasses on. He also didn't have his eyes. When I noticed it, it immediately fell, and when I looked out my window for it, I didn't see anything. No man, no creature, nothing. Like he just disappeared. I was so shocked and scared I hid under my covers the rest of the night, even though I was 16 at the time. I peeked my head up occasionally to make sure he never came back. Then in the morning, I told my mom about it, but it's not like she could do anything about it. The police would never find it, and my parents weren't going out there. This was terrifying, but nothing compared to the next story. I forgot to mention, but we had a dog named Mac. He was a golden retriever and was super friendly and helped us retrieve the animal carcasses when we hunted. One day I was out hunting with my dad, and we killed a couple rabbits and sent Mac to go get them, but we heard him bark, like he was telling us to go to him instead. We walked over to where he was barking and saw a tree covered with dead, skinned rabbits, each with a shark stick through their head and their eyes removed with a weird symbol carved into the tree. We were speechless and covered our mouths in shock, and then we heard someone whisper to us, "Hey guys, come over here." We hooked up Mac to his emergency leash and ran as fast as we could to our house. I looked behind me for who whispered to us and saw a man with a huge smile on his face and his eyes as wide as possible for a human to open them, staring at me, and then began to run towards us with a knife. My dad grabbed his hand pistol and shot him in the leg, and he fell to the floor while yelling in pain. Once we reached the house, we called the police and told them about it, and they sent multiple officers to search the area, but found nothing. Not the rabbits, no blood, no knife, no fingerprints. Not even the rabbits we killed. For the next couple months, we stayed in a relative's house. None of us felt safe anymore. But my dad, the one who shot the crazy man, was the only one who insisted we stay. Said we could defend ourselves. Said it was just another crazy, and that we should stay the rest of the summer. We agreed, but said if anything else weird or terrifying happens, we go to our house in the city. Then, the final story is what made us finally move out. One Saturday, I woke up and saw my mom missing from the house. My dad and sister said she was just going on an errand and that she'll be back in the afternoon. Afternoon came, and she got back. Nothing else eventful happened that day until night struck. We let Mac out. We just thought he was going to go to the bathroom and come back, but we heard him run away deep into the woods, like he was chasing something. I don't know why we didn't chase after him even after our creepy encounters before this. When he got back, he wasn't energetic. He wasn't acting like him at all. He was mopey, sad, and acting really weird. Normally, we would have just assumed he saw something in the woods that made him upset, but after the previous events, we were on edge. Then when we all fell asleep, I woke up to footsteps coming up the stairs. I peeked out my door and saw Mac, standing up like a human, his fur gray, his arms longer than they should be, and his head twisted and upright. His walking wasn't right either. He would walk one step, and his body would flop in the direction he stepped. He wasn't walking towards anything either, just roaming the hallway. My heart was beating out of my chest, and I called my sister, and after calling her 4 times, she finally picked up. I don't remember anything I said to her, but what I do remember is sneaking behind the thing pretending to be Mac, and met up with my sister. Luckily, the rest of my family slept downstairs, so once I met up with my sister, we were able to wake our parents without going past it. Logically, we stayed in the nearest hotel for the night. We had to go back and get our stuff though, so we went back to the house and found it trashed. The food in the fridge was scattered all over the house, and once we got our stuff, we drove away. I looked back to the house and saw the man, the thing in the winter clothes, staring at me. It was the thing pretending to be Mac. We drove back to our city house and never stepped foot into woods again.